Hello to Professor Glassman's class. Today's course on federal legal research hits three major areas that will be helpful in your assignments. First, secondary sources. We'll start with Practical Law, an exclusive Westlaw resource that will help you get up to speed in an unfamiliar area. Practical Law connects us to primary law, cases, statutes, and regulations that are important to figure out what to do. And then lastly, some research and workflow tools. Join me at lawschool.tr.com. You'll be able to take some notes along with our presentation today that you can use to follow along, to replicate in your assignments, and to answer the quiz at the end. Your client is a well-known Brazilian steakhouse that wants to bring chefs to the United States from, no surprise, Brazil. But how does that actually happen? I mean, the food doesn't just show up. The food gets prepared. The chefs don't just show up. A lawyer has to fill out some paperwork, figure out what the laws are behind that paperwork, and maybe even interpret those laws in order for those chefs to be admitted. That is your client, that is your case today, and while I wish that I could treat you all to fogo de chao, if you know how to do this, chances are your grateful clients will be able to do that for you instead. A little bit of Westlaw basics and navigation. Once more, setting your bookmarks to lawschool.tr.com will take you to this homepage. You can scroll down to see your account manager's contact information, and you can also see in the drop-down menu links to Westlaw and Twin and Practical Law. We will be talking about Practical Law today, but if you select Westlaw from the drop-down or that orange button, you can join me on this next page. So here we are in the upper left-hand corner, and notice here that there's a little bit of an arrow drop-down. If you select Practical Law from the list, you see where that is, Practical Law, you can access what I think is a fantastic secondary source. There are many smart people writing many awesome secondary sources, but I think that Practical Law is really great in helping you get up to speed in an area of law like immigration. So go ahead and do that. Click on it in the drop-down bar. Practical Law is built around these practice areas, which you can see in the white. There are resource types like checklists, and practice notes, and even model documents. And there's even jurisdictional specific stuff for places like Ohio. However, you'll just notice that from this list of white space headings, that there may be something that really pops out to you. And hopefully it's labor and employment, right? Because that's what we are trying to do. I mean, labor and employment of foreign nationals, specifically Brazilian steakhouse chefs in the United States. And of course, we could also get to it by throwing some words up here and then clicking search, that search button, or hitting enter. Lots of different ways to search for visa classifications, and I'm going to give you a sample search here as well. I simply typed in 2 words, business visa, and then hit that orange search button. No need to look through these practice areas, although if you select one first, it may winnow down the number of possible results. But here, we're pretty specific, even though this search is not really detailed. Business visa, I mean, that's a pretty layperson level understanding of it. Maybe even business immigration. But if you do that, you'll see how Practical Law or any other great secondary source helps you get up to speed. Specifically, that there are practice notes on Practical Law. These practice notes are maintained by the attorney editors there for updates to recent laws and best practices. You'll notice as well that there are 888 results, more than I have time to show you and more than you have time to see. So all of the things you're used to seeing on Westlaw, like what? Like maybe filtering, are available as well. Yeah? If you click on that resource type button, you might see some of what we've got. Practice note overview is kind of that 35,000 feet look at a particular topic. Once things really drill down, you've got those practice notes to help you with a very detailed area of the law. There may be others that are interesting to you, and we will talk about those in a second. But for our sake, the search engine is pretty great, and you can even just scroll through these first couple of results to see what might be valuable. I really, though, think Business Immigration Sponsorship Overview is a really great overview to get that 35,000 foot look at the topic. So if you click on it, you're going to see a practice note on practical law. If you don't see this table of contents, there'll be 3 little lines that you can click on from the left. Why is this so useful? I'm so glad you asked. This tells you what you need to know to do a thing. Specifically, if you're an employer like Fogo de Chão and you want people to immigrate to the United States, what does that look like? Well, plain language explanation of the legal issues. Are you telling me that some people are just flat out not authorized to work in the United States? Yes. Read that practice note. It'll tell you what that means and what the laws are that interpret it. Are you telling me that sometimes you may need to bring foreign workers in? Yes, that will explain it also. But no need to click on any of those things yet. Even just seeing what these issues are may open up some possible avenues for discussion. Again, getting that 35,000 foot overview so that way you can dig into something that is more relevant to your specific issue. As you keep on scrolling, you'll see what I mean. Are you telling me that there's a difference between immigrant and non-immigrant visas? Yeah, I mean, these chefs probably are only rotating temporarily to the United States, or maybe they are not looking to immigrate permanently to the United States. Are you telling me that there are different types and classifications of visas? That's very interesting. Those will come up again later. Where I'm directing our attention, though, because I do want us to get drilled down really quickly, is to this key non-immigrant visa classifications chart. Another example of the resources on practical law is one of these charts that shows you, hey, here is this legal category, here are the factors, here's how you do it, and by the way, here are some caveats. You will see these for other types of things, like maybe what business entity you should choose, corporation, partnership. What do all these words mean? What are the laws? You can see that practical law really distills them for you, and looking through these things might help you discover that there are certain types of visas, non-immigrant visas, that probably don't work for the people that we're trying to get admitted. You can see here, visitor for business probably might not be the one that works for our chefs. Why? Because short-term business purposes is definitely not why they're here. And then you can see here that there may be others as you scroll down through here that might work a lot better. Scroll down until you see L1B. Okay, so here we are at L1, intracompany transferee. There's a practice note that we will click on in just a second, but you will see that if you've taken a look at all of the visa categories in this chart, this would help you meet with a managing attorney and say, hey, I've looked at the relevant laws behind these different categories, and I think it could be this one or this one or this one. And your managing attorney says, yeah, good job. Let's go for this one. Let's go for the L1. Why? Because there's an employee with specialized knowledge at a U.S. company related to the employee's overseas employer, that there's different types of requirements, like some sort of specialized knowledge role. I guess that word keeps coming up. That might be important. There's some sort of procedure for it, so that's good to know. You can't just write a legal memo to the USCIS that those folks will become important later and say, hey, this person is eligible for admission under L1, and they'll say, oh, that's a great legal memo. Like, you actually have to do a thing, some sort of application process, and there's other formal requirements for this. If you like this, and I hope that you do, you would add this to a folder. Remember doing that on Westlaw last semester? Adding that to a folder allows you to pull this up later. Because why? Because maybe you might want to practice in this area, and the next time you work with it, it would be gravy. If you clicked on that practice note, so if you clicked on that L1 intra-company transferee, that whole practice note on the previous page, now we can really dig in. This is not just some 35,000-foot overview. Instead, this tells us the real nitty-gritty of the L1 intra-company transferee, non-immigrant visa classification. Some very smart person and the very smart people at Practical Law maintaining this, so this is not just a snapshot of the law at a particular date. And of course, allowing you to save this to a folder. What is so great about this? Scroll through and you will see. So here we are in the L1 requirements, and if you actually click on this one over here, you're going to see links to some things that I think are pretty useful. Why? Because once again, it explains, what the non-immigrant visa classification is. It connects you to statutes and regulations that interpret those particular areas of law, so that way you don't have to derp words into the bar and click on stuff randomly and hope that you get lucky. It tells you here are the criteria that you need to meet, or maybe some of the major factors that are part of it. And if you actually will scroll down to the bottom of anything on Practical Law, which we'll do in a second, it will connect you to model documents, checklists, and other resources that will actually help you do the thing. That is pretty exciting. Also exciting, check out these resources along the right-hand side, particularly saved to folder. Those workflow buttons are similar to the ones that you already are familiar with on Westlaw. Just experiment with them by mousing over them, and you'll see what we've got. But again, primarily, if you're following along, which I hope you are, make sure you park this into a folder, because that is handy if in case you want to practice in the area again. Keep scrolling, though. The L1B talks about specialized knowledge workers. Okay, so we know that our chef is probably not an executive, probably not a manager. So you're going to need to advance their L1 visa classification based on specialized knowledge. What is specialized knowledge? Well, turns out the US Code tells you what it is, and we will tell you that when you click into it, that's what you'll see. There are additionally regulations that further explain it. USCIS has promulgated regulations with this citation that tell you even more about specialized knowledge, so that way, again, your case for getting them that visa is now even stronger. By the way, they even author policy memorandums, administrative materials that interpret their own rules, that interpret the laws that apply to them, so that way, again, you can have a leg up in determining what this classification means for this worker. This is that policy memorandum, and again, you can imagine what this would look like if you went Googling for it on the internets. Your luck in finding it may be a little bit limited, so again, starting with Practical Law might help you locate the USCIS information about what L1B is, what the authorities, so again, you can see that statute and that CFR site, and then the way they interpret those things to think about what specialized knowledge is. Pretty interesting. If you go back and click on the statute, though, that would take you back into Westlaw. So by way of quick review right now, where are we looking? We're looking at the statute on Westlaw. You can read what that text is, because that's, again, pretty handy. You can scroll all the way up to the top to see that there's a title of the US Code that talks about aliens and nationality. There's a title that talks about immigration, a subchapter that talks about immigration, and that there's all sorts of qualifications for being here. If your professor or your managing attorney or your research has you starting with a statute, you could look under the citing references to locate resources under practical law that could help jumpstart your research. Why? Because if you do this, it might help you get to where you're looking a little bit faster than starting with the secondary sources or derping words into the bar and hoping you get lucky. And remember, friends, the notes of decisions from last semester, these things are the playbook for the statute. And if you click on those and go for hierarchical view, you might see a category by scrolling through this list that helps you understand what specialized knowledge is. Maybe not a perfect case on point with Fogo de Chao's issue, but maybe similar ones that you could use to argue by analogy. In this case, there is definitely a category about specialty occupations, which require specialized knowledge, which require inherent knowledge gained as a result of upbringing, family, and community traditions. Does this sound like cooking? Yes. And in fact, if you scroll down, there are multiple Fogo de Chao cases, one from 2014 and one from 2016. However, if it didn't exist, this is how you would find stuff that is similar to it. When Congress decides to regulate an area, whether that's immigration, food, or air travel, they pass laws that get codified in the United States Code. But what those laws don't do is they don't spell things out in minute detail. Congress says we'd like your air travel to be safe, but they don't say we want you to fly at this height, right? They say we want our food to be safe, but they don't say ice cream needs to contain this much milk fat. They may say we have these thoughts about immigration and non-immigration and visa categories, but they don't spell it out in minute detail, which is what the Code of Federal Regulations does. If you remember the last time you were on a plane, the announcement said federal regulations require you to comply with all crew member instructions. Federal regulations prohibit the tampering, disabling, or destroying of smoke detectors in the laboratory. Where do these federal regulations come from and how are they related to the U.S. Code? I'm so glad you asked. Within the U.S. Code section, the context and analysis on Westlaw allows you to select within the drop-down here, Code of Federal Regulations, and see the 13 areas in the CFR, a list of administrative regulations propounded by these administrative agencies. What they do in terms of the minutia of carrying out Congress's kind of general intent expressed in the U.S. Code. I'm at a section of the CFR that is 214.2. How did I get there? Well, again, you could scroll through that list of citing sections of the CFR. You could also start with practical law because it would say, here is what specialized knowledge is. Look at that section. Remember how we saw that in the practice guide? And you'll see that it looks a lot like the statute, right? You've got that kind of table of contents-y thing. I'm going to highlight a few other things that I think are nifty here. As you scroll down to letter D here, you'll see that that idea of specialized knowledge gets spelled out in even greater detail, and that's pretty nifty because Congress had only a couple words to say about it, but you can see here in the CFR, the administrative agency is adding more interpretive gloss that you can use and read and interpret to make your case even stronger. Additionally, there's a thing here under Compare Versions that is exclusive to Westlaw Edge that if you click on it, you will see might even be more helpful. Sometimes you need to compare multiple versions of the statute, maybe the one that you're looking at with the one that immediately preceded it, because maybe you filed the petition correctly in June of 2018, and it's only now just starting to slog its way through the legal process. When you need to compare multiple versions of a statute, here you can see, oh, and also a regulation because we are in the CFR, I misspoke. When you need to compare multiple versions of a statute or federal regulation, you can see that there's two differences, and that Westlaw Edge will tell you what those differences are with this little legend over here. This can be helpful and meaningful for reasons that I'll show you in just a second here. If you go to the second reason, there was some information that was the law until September 30th, 2018. And it had to do with something very interesting. Additional people who might be able to get H-2B non-immigrant visas, and that there might be things that would be helpful to folks who are needing to interpret that area of law. Sometimes the changes don't affect your area of law, in which case, whatever. But you can see that statutes compare, regulations compare. It's a thing, and it might be helpful to you when you're out there in the wild. If you like it, download email print, or just close out of it to go back to the regulations, since we're not interested in H-2B, but if we were, that might be handy. Under the citing references, you can see over 20,000 pieces of administrative decisions and guidance. What do you think those are? Again, it's probably rulings on particular petitions for admission. And that makes sense, right? Because the administrative agency is kind of your first stop along the way in figuring out what the deal is with those visas that you're applying for. You'll see links to secondary sources, appellate court documents. Again, when I say start with practical law, you can see that's a much narrower band of things to look at. And if you'd started with a regulation, it would take you to the same practice notes that we looked at the start. Again, if you click on notes of decisions, you'd see that there's definitely a FOGO case that tells you a little bit about how things go. So we're about halfway through, and I want to take us through this research pathway one more time. Get to practical law and follow along with me by clicking on the logo on the left-hand side. If you're on Westlaw right now, again, check that drop-down button and select practical law. When you're there, now that we know that we're looking for an L1B visa, you type that in and you hit enter over there along the side. Now that our search term is a lot more specific, our results are a lot more specific as well, 31 of them. Again, filterable with any of these left-hand side menus. Specifically, we'll notice that there are legal updates, including the one that addresses our Fogo de Chao case, kind of interesting. But as you scroll down through here, other resources that are also quite pertinent. Specifically, the L1 intracompany transfer. Can we talk about why forms are so fantastic? One thing that practical law does really well is connects you to some of these model documents, maintained by the attorney editors to keep abreast of changes in the law, updates to best practice, and the like. And of course, you're going to see kind of this plug and chug type thing where you see these fields that you would replace. But most importantly, when you're looking at any form, you want to check the drafting notes, because these things are kind of like miniature legal memos that tell you, here's what you need to do before using this document. Here's what all this legalese means, and that's why that's pretty important. Notice this button over here that says Open in Word. If you click on that, you'll see why this is really important. This downloads a version of the form so that way you can plug and chug and work with it. Pretty slick, huh? Saves you a lot of time. But going back to that resource on practical law, keep in mind that there are lots of notes, and clicking on those, again, explains to you what this legalese means, how best to characterize the stuff you're looking at, how to answer the client's questions about, hey, why did you pick this category and not that category? And once again, connecting you to those same sections of the CFR, like 214.2, the one that defines specialized knowledge, or to things like the US Code, or to things like the agency's administrative guidance, like that USCIS memo. If you scroll down to any document at the bottom of practical law, you'll see links to related content, like what? That there's actually a filing checklist of things that you would need to do, because once again, USCIS isn't going to accept a legal memo and grant your client the visa based on your brilliant legal argument. You actually have like a form, and that form is either one of these or one of these. And if you don't know what that means, again, check that practice note that will tell you about it. Use this form, use this piece of model guidance. Again, bringing together the stuff you would need to actually do the thing. But that's only one possible way to get to this information. I also want to show you that this is possible through looking at secondary sources on Westlaw Edge. So you can do this as well by going, again, back up to that drop-down menu and selecting Westlaw Edge. I'm going to type in immigration secondary, and when it pops up, click on this in the content pages. You can do this for any type of research workflow on Westlaw. Why? Because this is also going to work for you if you are looking at Ohio secondary, or criminal secondary, or constitutional law secondary. Do you think there are sections in the constitutional law secondary sources that can help you learn about your case? Give it a try. But once again, what we are not doing is we are not clicking on that orange search button. We are not looking literally for those words. We are instead looking for this source. Keep that in mind when you're doing research, and it will save you a lot of time. Noticing what we did here. Now, instead of drinking from a fire hose, we're looking at a filtered list of approximately 65 publications, and we can type in the words L1B visa and then hit search. Westlaw Edge is going to suggest things in the auto-suggest bar that are secondary sources, that in the secondary source immigration area, but I don't happen to think that they look terribly good for starting our research. So we can, again, click on search over here. As we're scrolling through the results, you can scroll all the way down till you see number 9. And as you're doing that, you'll notice, oh, hot dog, there is actually a law journal article that spells out the legal arguments for the L1B visa and Brazilian steakhouse chefs. But oftentimes, a law review is not the best place to start your research, unless you run that miracle search or find that perfect silver bullet article that does do that. Instead, we're looking at publication type along that left-hand side. Remember that filter menu. And clicking on it shows us that there are definitely a more limited number of texts and treatises that we could then check to winnow down this list of, well, 6,000 plus things into 2,000 something. And if we do that, we don't literally have to slog through all 2,000. I think that if you do filter for texts and treatises, which is what we did along that left-hand side here, results 6 and 7 are really great. Why? Because both of these are kind of how-to guides, just like the ones on practical law, that would tell us, hey, that this is how you do your L1 petition. Here's what you need to include in it. Here is what an L1B visa means. Here's some administrative guidance. Chances are there's a section of the Immigration and Naturalization Act, the INA, which is a statute, and we'll show you that and show you how to pull that up on Westlaw as well. All pretty slick and necessary moves to make. If you did click on 856, that second in that kind of results list that I was highlighting a second ago, I will point out one thing that's important to think about when you're doing your secondaries research on Westlaw, which is to check out the table of contents over here. Why? Because a search can get you most of the way here. It can get you to like an overview section that says, here's what this big idea is. But keep in mind that this is a book, right? And when you find a book that has the answers in it, generally you probably want to flip the pages until you are sure that your answer is not in a related section. You can see here, even though we start on 856, which is kind of our overview section, the one we really are looking for is 861, specialized knowledge. And again, another mini-sized legal memo that says, here are the cases, here's the statutes, here's the arguments that you would need to figure out that Fogo de Chao case. Again, within 861, which is specialized knowledge, links to the INA. Oh, are you telling me the Immigration and Naturalization Act is a statute? Yes, you can see it. That there's links to the CFR? Yes, you'll see it. That there's administrative guidance about the standard of specialized knowledge? Yes, you'll see it. And if you check out that other result, if you started there, again, that this would tell you what do you need to do a USCIS petition. Well, generally you need this, and then there's this form, and then you need a supporting letter, and then you need supporting documentation. And in each of those steps along the way, a step-by-step guide for taking those things on and doing them correctly. Pretty slick. But once again, this is the research process on Westlaw Edge. You find some secondary sources from a landing page like Immigration Secondary. All right, so we're going to have a quiz at the end of this to make sure that you both watched this and hopefully you learned something as well. Hopefully you did. And so there are generally 3 questions. The first one has to do with the L1B visa. So there is going to be a question about what type of visa is this, because the practical law practice note characterized them in kind of 2 different types. Make sure you remember that. And then there's also a statutory citation. Keep in mind the word statutory, which is not the same thing as regulations, right? Statutes and regulations, 2 different bodies of law, and we looked at a statute in the Immigration and Naturalization Act that spells out what these L1B visas are. There's also a CFR site that spells out more on what the word specialized knowledge means. Congress does say, hey, there's a special category for people with specialized knowledge, but then there's more interpretation about what that means, and we saw that in the CFR. So again, keep your eyes open for that. Look through the slides here until you find that. And then just a really basic question, which is how to access practical law. So if you were paying attention, that one should be the softball one, and then these other 2 questions shouldn't take more than 2 or 3 minutes to look through if you go through the recording or if you were paying attention and taking notes as we go throughout. When you finish a CLE in the practice, sometimes they'll give you a course code. It's like a word or a phrase that you need to say or list on your affidavit to make sure that you were paying attention. I'll get you ready for that now. Our course code is swing out. That's 1 word with a capital S. And so if you include that on your quizzes, then that way the people grading it will know that you were paying attention as well today too. So 3 questions, 1 about the statutory citation for the L1B, 1 about what the statutory cite is for specialized knowledge, and 1 about how to access practical law, just kind of generally. If you got more questions, remember, you're looking at the lawschool.tr.com site, and you're looking maybe for training at the Knowledge Center, because there's definitely more info up there about practical law and how to use that to tackle other types of problems. Next time, we're going to talk about how we could start this research from primary law. So we know that this Fogo case exists. It's out there in the world. I showed you it. You could probably Google it and stumble your way into it. But we did this to introduce practical law as a way to find those cases and tackle the task. We're going to review how to start with primary law and begin things from there. And then we're also going to share some final thoughts about legal research in our brief time together. Spoilers on that Knowledge Center website. I hope you learned something today that you might be able to take away with you not only into your legal writing assignments and legal research, but maybe into the practice as well. If you got more questions, drop a line on lawschool.tr.com. Thanks for watching, and best of luck today.